Today I'm going to give you a case study so that you get an idea of the two major topics that are key to proving a medical malpractice claim. So, key to any medical malpractice claim is negligence, but negligence on its own doesn't give you a claim. Negligence must result in harm. So we call it causation. So it's causal negligence, negligence that causes harm. So the example is one of a gentleman who arrives at a general practitioner with sudden severe pain in his tummy, in his abdomen over here, and it's just started. He's got a bit of a history of intestinal problems, and the GP does a few tests and decides, sure, this guy might need to be seen by a surgeon because such sudden abdominal pain is something that needs to be looked at. Goes and gives the surgeon a ring and says to the surgeon, I think you need to see this patient. Surgeon says, certainly, send him over to the hospital. Patient arrives at the hospital and the surgeon is in surgery. So the nurses take their readings and record blood pressure and pain levels, etc., etc. And it turns out the patient's blood pressure is a bit low and has been low for quite a while, given the reporting by the general practitioner of the observations that the GP made. And it takes a while for the surgeon to come out of surgery, and when the surgeon comes out of surgery, asks for blood tests, and those blood tests show a slight rise in infection rate, and the blood pressure is still low. But there are also other markers which point the surgeon in a different direction. The surgeon goes home, deciding not to treat the patient immediately, and many hours later, the nurses see the patient's blood pressure is very low again. Now we've got 3 or 4 low blood pressure results, and the nurses are alarmed. And they give the doctor a ring, and the doctor says, you know what, let's give the patient volume replacement, because it's very important for the blood pressure to remain up, but I'll do blood tests in the morning. During the night, the blood pressure drops even further, and by the time the doctor gets to seeing the patient at 6 o'clock in the morning, the patient is in a terrible condition. Blood pressure is extremely low, and it turns out that he's developed what we call septic shock. Now, septic shock is when the infection that is in the body causes the body to decompensate and to draw fluid from the blood and from the organs, and the body literally starts shutting down. The doctor then says, oops, there's a problem here. There's obviously an infection in the abdomen where the pain was so bad, and opens up. Turns out there's an infection due to a perforation in the abdomen due to the old problems that the patient had. And what's happened is that all the bacterial matter that comes with what runs through our intestines had infected the abdominal cavity. They call it peritonitis, and peritonitis, if you let it run for a couple of or for too long, can really harm your body by causing this decompensation and organ damage. And the low blood pressure is obviously not good for one. You can tolerate low blood pressure for a while, but not super low blood pressure, and obviously not for too long. So in this process, the patient obviously had too little blood flow to the body in general, one of the effects of septic shock is that your blood might clot in places and it might not clot as it should, and it's well known that you need to make sure that the blood flow to the end points, the peripheries, toes, feet, fingers, hands, those sorts of things need to be monitored carefully. So in the days that followed this septic shock incident, unfortunately this patient's leg and foot started becoming cold and discolored and disfigured, and it turned out that a clot had formed in the femoral artery, and this had resulted in low perfusion, low blood flow to the foot. Even though a vascular surgeon was called in eventually, this patient lost his leg. So several questions arise. Number one, should the surgeon have done more tests when he first saw this patient? Should he have reacted to that low blood pressure when told about it later in the evening? Should he reacted differently and done more tests at that time? And then what should he have done about the septic shock and about the effects on the blood flow to the leg? We got surgical experts in, and they told us about the effects of sepsis on the body and what the duty is of the surgeon when he's confronted by sudden abdominal pain with a history of abdominal complications. And the initial assessment and investigation and this decision to not immediately do surgery was sort of, one of the experts said yes, you should have done assessments immediately because of the low blood pressure and the pain. And another expert said, I'm not sure, I wouldn't necessarily have done it. It wasn't necessarily indicated at that time. Everyone, though, seemed to agree that investigations needed to be done when that last very low blood pressure was seen later that evening. Now, that is the point at which one has to decide whether the outcome is going to change one way or the other, because this abdominal pain was obviously caused by something, and it was caused by a perforation of the intestine, and that caused the fecal matter that was inside the intestine to leak out and start causing harm. So the person wasn't in septic shock when the first low blood pressure was found, because the other markers were okay, and certain damage had already occurred to the intestine. So there was negligence later that evening, but some damage had already occurred. So can the doctor be blamed for the damage to the intestine that he had to cut out? Because the negligence probably only occurred at later that evening, damage that had occurred up to that point is not for the doctor's account. But let's move on to the leg. So given that this blood flow problem, coagulability, complications that are known in sepsis is such a big deal, it's incumbent on the surgeon to keep checking peripheral perfusion, blood flow to the feet and to the hands. And the moment a problem is noticed, to call in a vascular surgeon to fully investigate what's going on here. Are there clots? Are there problems? And the surgeon did that too late, didn't respond to warning signs. Now, The surgeon allowed the patient, by not doing those tests earlier, the doctor who didn't respond to the low blood pressure late in the evening, allowed all of the complications to occur. So the septic shock and everything that resulted from the septic shock, if one can establish that you could have avoided the septic shock with proper care, which is what all of the experts agreed was the case, then whatever flowed from that, the doctor is to blame for that. So in this instance, the resection of the bowel, of the intestine, isn't the result of any negligence, but the after effects of the septic shock of this leg that got bad and had to be amputated certainly were caused by the doctor's inaction. So firstly, negligence, the experts tell us, should action have been taken earlier? No, at the early assessment. Definitely yes, when the later low blood pressure was pointed out, there should have been assessments, and we would have found indications of this abdominal perforation, and that would have caused certainly action which would have stopped the septic shock from happening. So the negligent act caused the amputation. So certainly that damage is claimable, whereas the cutting away of the intestine wasn't the result of any negligence. So not all of this man's complications and problems were the result of negligence, only the leg amputation. I hope that makes it a little bit clearer for you.